This happened to my wife and me a few months after we moved into a new place. This took place back in November of 2018, and actually wasn't even fully resolved until just recently. At this point in time, my wife and I were going through some hard times. I was making money through some slightly illegal means and had actually gone to jail for 9 months. Since we were starting all over after the legal fees, lawyers, fines, and other assorted debts, we knew we could only afford something super cheap that would let us pay week to week instead of having to pay security deposits and monthly rent up front. We found a boarding house in our city and checked it out. There were 4 rooms in the house with a shared kitchen and bathroom for everyone. We moved into one of the rooms. Our neighbors on the first floor were a 30-year-old Asian lady and her mom. Upstairs, there was a young black guy who moved in the same week as us, and also a young couple that lived in the room next to the young black guy. In the 3 months we lived there, the only people we talked to were the young couple upstairs. They seemed similar to us in age and interests, and we usually just talked to them in passing or on the front porch when we were all out there having a cigarette. They were nice enough. They also smoked, which my wife and I did as well, and we smoked on the porch together a couple of times. Things were just okay until the month of November came, and everything just started to hit the fan left and right with this couple, who we'll name Jim and Sierra. It started off small. Things like hearing them get into short shouting matches, or one or both of them, asking my wife and me to borrow money, or constantly trying to bum cigarettes. One day I came home, and Sierra was walking into the house at the same time as me with 3 guys I'd never seen before, and a case of beer. They partied all night and kept my wife and me up, but we ended up going to bed around 5 a.m. A few days later, we were woken up on a Sunday, my wife and my only day off, to Jim screaming at Sierra and throwing all her stuff into the front yard. They argued for like 3 hours, and eventually someone picked Sierra up. We had a week of peace and quiet, but by the next week she had moved back in, and the fights and screaming were constant until one night. It was a Tuesday night, the day before my birthday. My wife and I worked that day and just kind of lounged around after work. My wife and I ended up smoking around 1 and put in a movie to giggle at all night. The whole time we were watching this movie, we could hear Jim and Sierra screaming at each other. We could hear the stomp of their feet as they moved around upstairs in the room right above our ceiling. After actually making it through the movie without falling asleep from smoking too much, we both noticed that Jim and Sierra had finally stopped fighting. We both wanted to take advantage of the quiet and lay down and cuddled up to sleep until we had to go to work in the morning. I was woken up in the middle of the night by my wife, who was shaking me and looking off toward my side of the bed. I was so tired and out of it. I thought maybe she saw a bug and wanted me to kill it. I turn over to get up, and when I do, there is a man standing next to my bed, hunched over my nightstand, going through the drawer. The man has an empty milk gallon in his hand. After rolling over and us locking eyes, he stood up from his hunched position and was just staring at me. I kicked my feet out onto the floor and sat up on the bed as he started backing up slowly, 1 step at a time. At this point, I finally realized that it was Jim in our room going through my stuff, holding an empty milk gallon. Now, like I said, I was still pretty out of it, and just calmly said to him, "What's up, Jim? Why the hell are you in our room?" After a few seconds, Jim asked, "Can I borrow your guy's car, or can one of you take me down to the gas station and back real quick?" Thank goodness for my wife, who was finally fully awake, unlike me, and said, "You broke into our room to borrow our car? No. You can't borrow our car after you've broken into our room at 4 in the morning. Now get the hell out of here, you weirdo." Jim leaves, but he doesn't just leave. He sprints out of the front door and starts running down the street towards the gas station he wanted to go to. I look at my wife, and before we can even say anything to each other, our other neighbor from upstairs comes down and says that Jim and Sierra were fighting worse than he ever heard or saw. He said he hadn't heard any noise coming from the room for about an hour. My wife, who was feeling protective of a fellow female who had to endure this abuse, told me and our neighbor to go upstairs and check on her. We go up the stairs, and the door to Jim and Sierra's room is shut, but not locked. I knocked and shouted for someone, and there was no answer. Standing side by side, me and my neighbor turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. On the back wall of the room, Sierra was lying on the couch, face up. We also noticed that the floor and ceiling had been hacked up, like someone was trying to get inside the floor and ceiling for some reason. Me and my neighbor walked over to the couch thinking that Jim had knocked her unconscious. But when we made it to her, we realized there was blood on the couch and thin blood streaks on the wall and blood all over her. I can't speak for my neighbor, but as I looked at her, I thought, she doesn't have a face. The neighbor called the cops immediately, and I was just standing there. I heard him tell the police that Jim had smashed his girlfriend's face in with a sledgehammer, and the weapon was still there. The police told us to leave the room and wait outside if we felt safe doing so. The cops came and they found him an hour later running down the street. After talking to the cops, they said it looked like Jim was trying to find the gas line in the house, and he probably wanted to go to the gas station to get fuel to help him burn the house down with Sierra inside. After all the cops left and everything calmed down, we had to call into work the next day because there were 2 news vans out front all morning. Every time we stepped out for a smoke, they were badgering us for an interview. It ended up being a small blip in the news, with a short paragraph in the newspaper and a 1-minute segment on the local news channel. But yeah, that was how I was face to face with a killer right after he killed his girlfriend.